here we are. A very lovely looking book, as you will see, and appropriately coloured in gold. Because this is a sort of high comedy. It's sort of like halfway between P.G. Wodehouse and a Julian Fellows, some Julian Fellows thing that we've never heard of. So tell us a little bit about this. It's a return to a family that we met struggling through the 2018 financial crisis, and now here they are with new crises on their hands.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. I thought this might be called the pizza oven because it's so warm. So, not the piazza something. So, I hope that we all manage not to pass out during this session. I'll try and keep you going. So, yes, this is the second. It's the second in a series, but you don't have to have read the first one to get what's going on. And it centres around a story called the Trelawney family, who are an English kind of aristocratic family who fell on very hard times in 2008. And what happened was that I fell kind of in love with this family, and it was quite a hard. It was quite difficult to let them go. You know, rather like a nice friendship. You don't necessarily want to say goodbye, and then go on to, you know, another book or set up another whole thing. So I thought, right, well, I'll take my favourite character from the first book and then I'll give her a whole new life. So my favourite character from the first book is a young woman called Ayesha Scott. Now, her backstory is that she was the illegitimate daughter of a young woman who'd lost her parents in a car crash. And this young woman who got pregnant with Ayesha, our heroine, didn't quite know who the father of her baby was. And he could either have been an Indian Maharaja or he could have been an elderly English earl. And she decided it'd be much more fun to be with the Indian Maharaja. So she told him that this child was his, and they went to live in India in his equally dilapidated palace. Anyway, when the child came out, it was fairly obvious it probably wasn't his. But the mother, by this point, brought her daughter up to believe that the only thing that mattered was financial security. You couldn't rely on love. You couldn't rely on anybody else. All you needed in life was financial security. So the young woman eventually comes to London, tries to find her biological father, who doesn't want anything to do with her anyway, and then decides what I must do is marry for security. So she sets her cap at this very rich, very unscrupulous financier in the city. She gets him, and she thinks that life is fine after that. Because after all, she's got the money, she's got the grand house, she's got the lifestyle. What could possibly go wrong? That's where we meet her. And funnily enough, just about everything goes wrong. And I don't want to give too much of it away, but the guy turns out to be every bit as nasty as one might imagine. And then she has a choice to make, and her choice is either she is going to accept her fate, which is to be dumped disposable asset, or she's going to fight back. And the book really, without giving any spoilers, is about her attempts to fight back and to... she has no resources at all at this moment. She has a degree in art history. She is very gutsy. She has a little girl, age 5, who's obviously not a weapon, should never be a weapon. But that's about it. So this is the story of how she tries to fight her husband and how she tries to rescue both her own sanity, her own station in life, and custody of her child. So that's the background.
That's the background.
Yeah.
So part of what and the reason I mentioned Julian Fellows is because one of the characters is the house, basically, isn't it? There is an old castle which is sort of very dilapidated, which the family lost in 2008, which this couple have bought. This girl and her, she is sort of could be an heir, although she's.
Well, she couldn't because she's a girl.
Because she's a girl.
Yeah. If she'd been a boy, she could have possibly qualified.
Yes, which is part of your thing about heredity is one of the themes in it, isn't it? So they live in this ramshackle castle, which she is actually doing up.
Yeah, so when she marries this guy, she said, "Oh, we've lost about a third of our audience already. I wonder what we did wrong." It's all right. I'm making a joke. It's okay. I'm making a joke. It's all right. But no pressure for anyone else to stay, right? Because I'm looking.
You will be noticed.
You will be noticed.
But we don't
Shame
mind.
will descend. Okay. I may not sleep. Sorry, it's not very fair, is it? It's all right. I'm having a laugh. It is very hot, so it's fine if you want to go. Where were we? Yes. So she has the house in English, in the English system of primogeniture. Belongings, houses, chattels generally go to the eldest son, and daughters. And I think it's not dissimilar, I think, to many cultures. But I wanted to look. I write satire and comedy. You're probably getting a bit of a taste of what I'm like. So I take it kind of quite seriously, but within the veneer of humour. Mm. So I'm trying to make fun of a class system.
Mm-hmm. So you had this extraordinary career, including being chair of the National Gallery, and then suddenly, I remember when you suddenly emerged one year with your first novel. And everyone was saying, "Who is this? What is this novel?" And blow me down, it went on to be longlisted for the Women's Prize and to win the Wodehouse Prize for Comedy. Why did you decide to write comedy? I mean, comedy is it's a difficult form in the novel, isn't it? It's difficult to be taken seriously. It's difficult to get it right.
So my first career was in television. So I worked for the BBC for about 14 years making arts documentaries, but secretly I'd always wanted to be a writer, and I've said this before, but it's absolutely true. I could have wallpapered a wall with rejection slips. So anyone who fancies this, just keep going. And I went on and on writing. Now, one of the reasons I think that I was so profoundly unsuccessful as a writer was because I thought, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I'm just being very honest now. I thought that I should probably be able to write something quite serious. And, I was a great reader, so I've read all the classics, and I wrote probably fantastically pretentious stuff, basically. I kind of thought if I was going to be a writer, I had to be Tolstoy or something. I don't know what I thought. God knows what I thought. Anyway, really ridiculous. And then one day, when I turned 50, it was my 50th birthday, was kind of thundering towards me. And I suddenly thought, if you don't do it now, then you'll never do it. And I sat down. Should I tell you the whole long story?
Yes.
Okay, this is by humiliation. I'm really going to. So I got married. I had 3 kids. My husband disappeared. Long story, won't go into that now. Was feeling unbelievably sorry for myself. With reason, by the way, not just self-pity, just, it was quite difficult having 3 little girls and everything else, and a failed career as a writer and everything else like that. Anyway, somebody said, go and see a fortune teller. Okay, I know it's embarrassing, but it's true. So anyway, so I went to really the outer reaches of London to see a lady called Ivy. And there was a funny little house, and I opened the door, and there was a woman, and the whole house was full of crucifixes, and she sat there, and there was a red velvet table with a crystal ball. I can tell you something, I felt so much better at that moment, because I felt, you get your sense of humour back. It's like, what am I doing here? Really, what am I doing? And I got a speeding ticket, by the way, on the way. So it was really not going very well. Anyway, she sat down, and she said, I won't try and do an Irish accent, because it's quite rude, but anyway, she said, the first thing she says, your love life's a disaster. So that thanks a lot. I knew that already. And then she said, you're going to write a book. And then she said, you're going to be walking on the countryside, and you're going to look down, and you're going to see purple everywhere. This is a very important part of the story. So I thought, great, yeah, fine, speeding ticket, idiot, blah, blah, blah. And then she said, and then you're going to sit down the next day and start writing a book, and the heroine is going to be called Annie. Anyway, I left there really cheered up, actually, because I thought, oh, this is marvellous, you idiot, whatever. Then 3 months passed, and I was walking in Devon, and I looked down, and the whole hillside was purple. It was the weirdest thing, and it was these violets that come out every 5 years in this landscape. And I saw it, and I remembered. I thought, whoa, that is quite odd. And the next day, I sat down, and I put the blank piece of paper up, and I wrote a story about Annie, which then became The Improbability of Love. And the most important part of the story is not necessarily Ivy, although, my goodness me, she was key, but it was, I just didn't really think about the tone or anything. I just sat and I just wrote, and that's, very long-winded answer to your question, but why comedy? Well, actually, because luckily I'd set off in this kind of comedic tone. So that's why, and that's my tone. I'd love to write like Tolstoy, by the way. I'd love to write serious books, by the way, but I'm afraid that's not what I can do.
And so who do you test it on? Do you have people who you have to do a laughometer with to see whether actually what you've written is funny?
I've got a very, very good agent, Sarah Chalfont at the Wiley Agency, you probably know her, who is amazing. So she's the first person that reads it. And funnily enough, this last book, I wrote the first draft in lockdown, and I did send it to a friend of mine. And she was very polite. She goes, yeah, nice, she goes. You know, that's a kind of killer, isn't it? She goes, it's lacking a joie de vivre. And I think what had happened was in lockdown, I lost any sense of fun or anything else. So she said, you need to rewrite it. So when lockdown ended, I then rewrote it. So who do I test it on? I test it on a couple of friends and my agents. But you don't know, funny, I mean, one person's joke is another person's kind of grimace, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But you can, I mean, you kind of have to have your trusted readers, don't you?
Yes.
And the point is, you know that they have good taste.
Yes, you do. But it is a bit like running naked down Oxford Street, isn't it? Writing a book, you know that. I mean, it's kind of you don't really know till it comes out and you find an audience like here, or you find readers. You don't really know whether it works, I think, because your friends, however generous they are and however kind, they are going to try and be a little bit nice and constructive. I mean, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, the friend of mine who said that it lacked kind of whatever, I think that was a really honest and generous thing to do, actually.
Mm. You're not. You're generally nicer to women than you are to men. Husbands don't come out of it very well.
Funny that. Yes, I think probably I find it easier to write about women, funnily enough. The story actually originally, the whole kind of idea for this family and the friendships came about because of a trip I'd done with a girlfriend to India in our kind of gap year, so to speak. And I wrote very, very, very long letters. And so I was really interested in writing about female friendships and about women. I mean, the men, there's a man in here, there's the which I hope you read it, by the way, but the guy in here who's the central character, the kind of baddie in inverted commas, people say, is this a caricature of a man? No, actually it's not. I'm afraid to say there are people like that. And I could have Hollywoodized him and given him a kind of more touching backstory and a moment of redemption. And I thought very hard about that. I thought, shall I get him to suddenly become a much more rounded character and to do the right thing? And I thought, well, actually, no, because in this case, I'm not saying all men are like this by any means, but in this case, I felt that he was representative of a certain kind of person, in this case, a man. Mm. Not just men, but... Yeah.
Mm. And a part of it's underpinned, although it is a comedy involving fictional characters, it is underpinned by real politics.
Yes.
So it is, and they're the real politics in terms of, actually your characters are doing what we're watching people in our public life do. So in that sense, but also in terms of the real things that have happened in the world in the last, since Brexit looms over it.
Yeah. So I wanted to make this quite real and realistic, and as it was set in 2016, I wanted to look at what had actually happened and how those events impinged on the characters. So in a previous book I'd written about 2008 and the effect that the crash had on people, the financial crash. And in a funny way, this book, what I wanted to think about then was, okay, so we know what happened in 2008, and what was the fallout 8 years later in 2016, where we saw here Brexit, we saw Trump in America, we saw the rise of strong men leaders on the whole around the world. We saw financial markets not quite recovering. We saw old behaviour continuing. We saw the rise, actually, in this country anyway, the kind of Brexit, which seemed to be a very real response to, I think, people feeling out of control, people feeling they wanted to close their borders, people feeling that actually we didn't want to be, subservient to Europe, which I hasten to add, and I don't mind saying this, I am passionately against Brexit, I'm afraid. I'm a Remainer. I'm sorry if that upsets anybody, but on the other hand, I can understand why people voted for it. So that was the realpolitik of what was going on behind it. And then I wanted, the plot is set in the financial markets because I'm very interested by financial markets, basically. I mean, it's a niche interest, but I find it interesting. So I quite like putting characters into real history.
Mm-hmm. And one of the characters is a cryptocurrency diva. So, I mean, this is also really something that's very current and happening now.
Well, I have to, again, be absolutely honest with you, I did not make this character up. There is a fantastic podcast on BBC Sounds called The Missing Crypto Queen, which isn't it brilliant? Yeah, Bulgarian. She's called Ruja Ignatova. And this is absolutely, and I need to write to the man who did the series to thank him very much indeed, because he did it so well. So she's on the run now. You've listened to the series. So this incredibly flamboyant Bulgarian woman who organised sales conferences, rather like kind of pop concerts. She would appear out of a sparkling ball. She would disappear up a sparkly staircase, etc., etc. And but she set up this giant Ponzi scheme, which a lot of cryptocurrencies, not all, but a lot, are just Ponzi schemes. And I basically lifted a lot of what I'd heard in that podcast. And now this particular woman is actually from Albania. She has some similarities to Dr. Ruja. Some, I should say, not all. So like a lot of fiction, it's jumped from life. But crypto, to me, seems to be the most kind of fascinating financial subplot of our time. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but...
Go on, talk more about that. I'm really interested in it. I thought that was a whole theme. You could write a novel about her, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe you should do it from her point of view, the next one from her point of view. She could buy Trelawney Hall.
She could... Well, wait, let's see. So, in Albania, which is a country I'm incredibly interested in Albania in the 1980s, just when Albania was shaking off the shackles of successive communist rules, so it had been under China and under Russia, and then it started to break free. And as it started to break free, these unbelievable Ponzi schemes started. And bless you. And basically, a lot of Albanians put their life savings into these get-rich-quick schemes, and as a result, lost everything. And it was a very, very real an absolutely tragic moment for a population which were really trying to break loose from, from their past and become independent, etc., etc. But I had my character as being somebody who grew up in that milieu, who was absolutely lost everything. So her family lost everything, she lost everything, and I thought, well, actually, what would you do if you'd been through that as an Albanian? I thought, well, maybe what she would do is then try and, in a way, use that Ponzi scheme, but in a different milieu. So I had her using it in crypto. So crypto, as I think probably a lot of people here know, is a promise. So basically, you buy a crypto coin that doesn't really exist, and you are told that it equals, sometimes they're traded on the open market, so like Bitcoin, or they're self-regulated, or sometimes they're actually traded. But basically, you buy a coin and someone says that coin equals $4. And you can see its value fluctuate on various charts, etc., etc. And it promises that it will accrue value very quickly. So, you buy one, in this case it's called a Queen coin, and it will double its value. And the way you make it double its value is actually you sell it to your best friend or your villager or wherever else you may come from. And this woman, Ruja Ignatova, basically set up a currency, and she then sold it to various other salesmen who then sold it on and sold it on. So each time you sell it, you get a bit of money. But of course, the person you're selling it to has to get his or her commission, so they have to sell it on, and on and on and on it goes. And she raised billions and billions of dollars, which went straight into her own pocket. And as we've seen from the cryptocurrency crashes, this has been a very common phenomenon. Now, interestingly enough, of course, all currencies to an extent are what you think they are. Because since we've been, for example, since sterling's been taken away from gold, sterling is a promise. You know, it's just, I promise you this pound is worth a pound, etc. It isn't necessarily worth a pound, it's just what we believe. So there's something at the heart of crypto which isn't that dissimilar from other currencies, actually. It's kind of...
And I mean, this is a theme that runs through it, isn't it? I mean, so, for example, what is a diamond?
Yes.
Is it, you know, if you think it's a diamond, it's a diamond.
Exactly. I mean, you know, what is Peugeot? This is Yuval Noah Harari spoke brilliantly about this. So, you know, he was a brilliant writer. He wrote *Sapiens*. I'm sure lots of you read that. So he makes this, I think, I can't remember if it's this one or the next book, he makes this wonderful point that, you know, with brands, I mean, a handbag, for example, can cost thousands of pounds. We know that it only costs a fraction of that to make, a kind of high-end, high-net-worth brand. But we're buying the brand, if you like. So much of what we buy and what we value now is about branding. And to an extent, crypto is that. To an extent, it's a brand or it's a promise. So that handbag, you buy yourself an Hermes handbag and you think, oh, well, I'm going to feel a bit better because I bought something that's valuable and that other people want, you know, Kim Kardashian wants, or whoever else, you know, you might think you want to be.
And it doesn't really matter if it's a fake that you picked up, if people believe it's the real thing.
It doesn't matter at all. Well, it does matter if you want to resell it, obviously.
Yes.
So you're not going to... And I guess it does, in some ways, I get asked a lot about this, about authenticity, and how much does authenticity matter? Personally, I think authenticity matters very much, so I could go out and commission a fake Rembrandt, and probably most people in the world wouldn't know whether it's the real thing or not, because fakes are so brilliant now. Does that matter? Well, actually, I think it matters, because when I go around the National Gallery, for example, they are real. I know that over the years, tens of thousands of people have looked at that Rembrandt hanging on our walls. We hope it's real. And you think, well, there's something rather wonderful about something being admired and something accruing value. I don't know. I think authenticity does matter. But you're right in many respects. You can't tell the difference.
You can't tell.
No, you can't.
You can't tell. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's that you don't...
In fact, and there's a subplot in the book where one of the ways she exacts revenge is she decides she's going to get some fake paintings made. And I have a friend who will remain nameless, who lives not in this country, and I can promise you something. I mean, he doesn't do this, by the way. He doesn't dupe the experts, but he can make perfect copies. And one of the ways he does it so brilliantly is that he actually will buy a contemporary canvas from when the painting he's copying is made. He will find out exactly what paints that painter used and recreate them. He will then bake it in the oven. There was one painting that he was asked to do. This was for an exercise, I hasten to add. And this particular painting had been stolen during the Napoleonic Wars. So
is this the painting that's in The Impossibility of Love?
It is.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So best ideas come back, I always think. But anyway, so he found a donkey, and he got this painting, and he put it on a donkey, and he took the donkey out in the rain, because this is what happened to the painting during the Napoleonic Wars. It had been taken over the Alps by one of Napoleon's soldiers. Anyway, listen, you can do it. You can fool people. Is it the same? I don't think so.
So why does he do it, out of interest?
My friend?
Yes.
Oh, well, he does it. He does it because actually what he does, which is much more important, is that he can recreate perfectly ruins or things that have been destroyed. So, for example, I think he will, at some point, I hope, help them to rebuild Palmyra, which, as you know, was destroyed. He can do stuff like, I mean, for example, there's a project. This is an interesting one. Should he make absolutely perfect copies of the Elgin marbles? And then should the originals be, for example, move between Athens and London, because you couldn't possibly tell, but then at least the British who feel that or the British Museum who feels it has a perfect legitimate title to own the Elgin marbles, could lend them, and then they could be swapped, and in fact nobody would be any the wiser. I mean, that takes us down another rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
It is an interesting rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe another book.
So now there's an awful lot, and when you talk so interestingly, and your research is sort of top-end journalism. How do you decide what to leave in and what to put in and what to leave out?
Thank you for the compliment. I think my first job was as a researcher at the BBC, and I think it's still my best job. And I do love that bit. And the problem is, as you rightly say, is what do you put in and what do you leave out? I think ultimately it has to be about story and it has to be about character. And sometimes I think you can lose a thread very easily by putting in everything that you're interested in. I think people just sit there going, for God's sake, So that's my editor's job. My editor goes through and she goes, nah, that is you might be interested in that, but I don't think anyone else will be. It's quite rude, but true, and is true. And secondly, this is getting in the way of the story. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's hard, isn't it?
Really hard.
Yeah.
So we're onto the subject of art history. Art history's played a very important part in all your fiction, and in this one, she has two what does she call them? Her role models. And one is Artemisia Gentileschi, who's a Baroque artist who was recently exhibited in the National Theatre. At the National Gallery, it was the first ever woman in the National Gallery to have a solo exhibition. How can you be chair of this organisation, Hannah?
I know. Look, it's a good question. When I got there, this is much less than 1% of the collection were women. Had works by women in the National Gallery. And this, I mean, either you say, I cannot be associated because of that, or you say, I'm going to be associated and going to try and change it. And that was the decision. I thought, right, well, it is shocking. It's really shocking. There's 2,700 pictures in the National Gallery or something, and there's like 20 by women, so it's less than whatever. So then you try and change it. Now, the next issue is, you can go shopping, you can go and buy lots of paintings by women artists, which there are, obviously. There aren't nearly as many as by male artists, and that's another whole discussion about why. But that is tokenism, and that would not be right. I don't think that would serve women right. I don't think it would serve the National Gallery right. So you have to wait, and you have to wait and find a really good artist and a really good picture by that artist. So there are female artists who are fantastic, but they've made some duff works. Similarly, there are some fantastically good works by very unknown women artists. But let's face it, every museum in the world is now chasing female artists. Every collector, every museum. So if you're doing something like the National Gallery with a limited budget, you've got to be very mindful of your budget, and this belongs to the people of the UK, all the pictures. And secondly, what can you afford? So yes, we made it a central theme and central wish that we would try and improve how many women there were in the collection, but it's not quite as easy as all that. But what we can do, and what they are still doing, is exhibitions by women. And the Artemisia Gentileschi show was I think, a game changer, actually.
And it was. I haven't seen such excitement about a show. I mean, it's partly to do with coming out of lockdown, but sort of everybody I knew was desperate to go and see it. And it was an amazing show. It was an extraordinary show, and it showed she has the most incredible back. This is back to your question. So you have a part of her story in the novel. Yeah. So she was again. Sorry, forgive me if I'm rabbit holing again, but so she was a Baroque artist, and so that's 17th century, late 16th, early 17th. She kind of tipped over, and she worked in her father's studio, and her father actually, who was a well-known painter called Orazio Gentileschi, saw that she had incredible talent, went against the kind of mores of the day, and said that she could work in his practice. He had many, many people working around him, as painters often did and still do, for that matter. They have whole studios and people. And she worked for him, and she showed great talent.
he had another person in his studio, a guy called Tasso, and Tasso raped her in a very horrible, nasty way, but very violent, very brutal way. And what she was expected to do at that time was to kind of swallow, no, sorry, it's terrible when things say, but she was expected just to kind of keep a passive exterior and get on. And she took him to court. And it's almost unheard of that a woman would take a man to court for rape, particularly somebody who she knew, and particularly somebody, well, they were both under her father's care and protection. And the judge in the court didn't believe her. And the way that he decided, this judge, to try and see whether she was lying or not, was that he put thumb screws on her. So bear in mind she's a painter. She has her thumbs put into these screws, and they turn the screws and turn the screws till they, you hear, there are contemporary accounts of this, till they hear the bones breaking. And she still refuses to change her story. At that point, they go, okay, she's not lying, we believe you. And then Tasso gets banished a bit from the whichever court, I forget which court they were painting at the moment. And the most tragic bit of the story, and the thing that really, really hurts, offends, saddens, whatever you want to say, is that after it was over, Artemisia begged him to marry her because she knew that now, having gone out publicly and told everybody that she was, defiled, that she would never get a husband. So she said, the least you can do now is marry me. Anyway, she pours all of this heartache and experience and everything else into her paintings. And I think it's one of the reasons why her paintings are so incredibly powerful.
So, for example, the beheading of Holofernes, is
yes,
it? There's an amazing picture.
Yeah. Amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
And you see that, and you see there is a lot of blood and gore and anger and...
Strong women exacting revenge.
Very strong women. And she painted women, the other thing she did was she painted women working. And again, women up to that point, in fact, for many hundreds of years afterwards, were painted as quite decorative. They were painted as, characters in a story. I mean, they're wonderful. There are wonderful, strong women. You think of Rembrandt often paints very strong women, but they're never necessarily women in their own right. So she paints women working. So she paints herself as a wonderful self-portrait in the Royal Collection. Do you know that one? Mm-hmm. So she's painting. And then there's a lot of things where they're doing things. And again, this was quite unusual at the time. Mm.
So now there's another, she has another guiding spirit,
yes.
a role model, and that's Isabella d'Este, who I'd
yes.
never... Has anybody else heard of Isabella d'Este? No, I'd never heard of her.
So Isabella d'Este she was a Renaissance countess who lived in the town of Mantua. She was born in d'Este, exactly right, and then she married the Duke of Mantua, and she went there, and the Duke almost immediately had to go to war, because that's what they all did in Tuscany. They were constantly fighting. So her husband goes off to war. She's left at home running the shop. And Mantua at that time was quite a small, quite an impoverished place, so they didn't have very much money. And what she did was completely brilliant, is that at the time, the same time, all around them, in other princely states, there were the Medici, there were the Dukes of Milan, there were various other, and what they were doing was that they were buying and selling paintings. And there were leading painters at the time who everybody wanted. And she decided to use the power of art and art ownership to do deals with neighboring states. So she persuaded Leonardo, she persuaded Mantegna, she persuaded Bellini, various other people to paint for, and then she used that as collateral because her own armies weren't very big. So I loved her. I think she's a fantastic role model about somebody who's... And her advisor was Machiavelli, who she knew. So she'd get in touch with Machiavelli. And that, of course, in those times, the world was a lot smaller, despite there being no email.
And she was the sister-in-law of Lucrezia Borgia, wasn't
yes.
she?
So Lucrezia Borgia ran off with Isabella's husband, had a child with him. Lucrezia Borgia ran off with most people. She earned her whatever it is, her reputation, I think is fair to say. But was actually Lucrezia Borgia is a huge rabbit hole we could fall down. She was a much, much more interesting woman than she's now made out to be. She's now written off as just this kind of harlot. Well, she was a bit harlot-y. I mean, she did... But she was incredibly interesting. There were incredibly interesting people through history, which I'm afraid to say have been written out. A lot of women have been written out. This is not a surprise to you or anyone in this audience. And actually, when I went to Mantua, I thought, I'm going to go and pay homage. I'm going to go to her palace where she was. I'm going to go and find her grave. I'm going to this. In the whole town, there is not one reference to Isabella. There's not one picture. Her grave has been forgotten. Nobody knows where it is. There's no references in the palace. I mean, it's such a bad opportunity for Mantua. Imagine what they could do with tourism. You know, they told this incredible story. Anyway, whatever.
So I'm interested in the fact that you have an artist and a patron, and they're the twin poles, but they're both equally important, and that's unusual to make that. Usually, people go galloping after the artist and forget about the people who make things happen by judiciously using their taste and their wealth.
Yes, I was very upset. Well, it goes back to your question actually, Claire, about how do you put things right when they're wrong, like at the National Gallery. So there aren't that many female artists pre-1900, truthfully. I mean, and that's another question of why. There's a lot of very complicated reasons why. Partly they've been washed away in history, partly they weren't given the opportunity, etc., etc. So how then can you tell the story of women in art if it's not necessarily a painter? And one way of doing it, I thought, by the way, nobody's taken up this idea, just to be clear about it, but I'm still trying. One way of doing it is to look at great patrons. And Isabella was a great patron, and it's a way of telling women's story in art, not necessarily through them being practitioners.
I think that's a really, really good point. Yeah. So one area we haven't really explored is the class snobbery, which cuts in many different ways. You've got old money, new money. You've got they have family who are from India, don't they? Who turn up, it all sort of comes to a head at a banquet with Prince Charles and Camilla.
Yeah. Yes, I thought it'd be quite fun to set something in Buckingham Palace, and so I did. and these different parts of the family collide at this big dinner. I don't really want to go too much more than that. I want you to read the book, really. Yeah. But anyway.
Go on about old money and new money and the incredible snobbery that is sort of hanging around. But the old money needs new money to survive. Yeah. So and there's this fabulous portrait of an old dowager duchess who's been displaced, who's in her 80s and wears a rubber miniskirt.
Yes. She's a marvellous character, Clarissa. So she's a countess, but of course her castle, unfortunately, A, was crumbling, and then B, was sold. So she now lives in a very, very small house on the outskirts of Thame in Buckinghamshire. But she's still got these fantastic illusions of grandeur about who she is and why she's important and everything else like that. So she's living really in the past. And my observation is, and this could be applied not just to the aristocracy, but could be applied to many situations, is that we hang on, I think, to the past. We hang on to things, and I mean, I think we all hang on to things perhaps we should let go of. I know that I certainly do. It doesn't include very, very large houses, but there'll be old patterns of behaviour or bad habits, whatever those, in my case, many. But in the aristocracy's case that I write about, a lot of it is hanging on to the fact that they think they're much, much, much grander than they actually are. And they're living in this kind of fantasy world where they matter. And truthfully, they don't matter anymore, because they might have mattered when they owned huge swathes of the country, or when they had, the ear of a prime minister, whatever it might be. But actually, they've got nothing now, but that's their identity, and it's very hard to let go of identity. So I'm sympathetic, because I've just seen one of the great comic writers of our time, by the way, called Howard Jacobson, one of my heroes. Sorry, I just thought you might, just if you want to look at the real deal, he's out there. I know. He's waving. Oh, hello. Sorry, if you want to know how to write great comedy, don't you think?
He is very good. Yeah, he's a very good
funny.
comic writer.
Very. So it was a slightly. Hopefully, he's coming in here next. But that's really put me off my stride. When you're talking about your work, and then you see one of your heroes.
We were talking about class. So what I want to ask finally, before I see if we have any questions on the floor, is why are we so interested with these stories of these posh people? Why? no, it still fills our television. And I mentioned Julian Fellows and the series, Downton Abbey, obviously the series that I don't often mention because it makes me feel faintly sick.
Yeah. So I think it's a more Succession.
Succession.
Did you see Succession, everyone? I mean, the amazing, which I thought was one of the best things I've ever seen, ever. And what was extraordinary about Succession is there wasn't a single likable character in it. So I mean, maybe you did like. Did anyone here like anyone? You did. Who did you like? You didn't. Is there anyone you like? Anyway, I'm not. They're not like. Who?
Who did you like?
Oh, Willa.
Willa.
Okay, Willa. Yeah, Willa's a thought. Anyone else like anyone? Who? Who's yours?
Logan.
Logan. You love Logan. Okay. All right. That's niche.
Well, he is sort of himself, isn't he? At least he's himself.
Okay. So who? Greg. Oh, you like Greg? Okay. Okay. So you're finding people you like, but they're not like. Would you want to spend the rest of your life with any of them? Obviously, you do with Logan. Yeah. Yeah. That is darker than anything I've ever written, by the way. Would you have him in a coffin, kind of beside you? But why do we like them? I think why do we like those things? Well, I think partly because there's a kind of gorp factor, isn't there? I mean, it's kind of like, oh, that's. I mean, no, there's a gorp factor about living your life, in a private jet or whatever else, and about the scale of what they get up to. But I think really it's about families, and I think that the thing that Downton's about is family, and the thing that Succession is about is families. And I'm trying to think, The Crown, classic, family. I mean, there may be the royal family, but really it's about a family, isn't it? So I hope that that's. I mean, I've got the trappings of these people's lives wrapped around a family, but ultimately I think I did it because I wanted to write about families.
About families. So, do we have anyone who wants to ask anything from the floor? Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. I read the Improbability of Love, and one of the things which struck me at that time was you write about the Russian oligarchs at that time, and not very complimentary terms. And that was a time when they were, very welcome in London. It's not like today when things have changed. So how was that, and how come you were ahead of the curve, so to say?
So, a very high-level journalist.
Thank you for reading it. Thank you for what you said. By the way, I'm a bit ahead of the curve here because, though I say so myself, crypto, of course, has come crashing down. And then this week there's a man whose name I won't mention, but there's a man, a financier who's in a lot of trouble, who was one of the major backers of Brexit. There's got some knowing laughs at the back. I guess, I could say something flip like, well, what goes up is eventually going to come down, so it's just luck, good timing. But at that time when I was writing about the art market, it was very hard to write about the art market without writing, in a satirical way, writing about oligarchs. And also they made such good characters. I mean, I don't know if you like Vlad, but I loved writing about him. Yeah. Anyway, in this one I've got a couple of other rotters. So, which I'm happy to say they're all reaching a sticky end about now, which I think is quite good publicity, but I can't mention their names.
Yes, it's quite. You could actually do. I quite like looking at the prophetic bits of novels because a good novel often is slightly ahead of the curve. Weirdly, it's like a novelist. I always think a novelist's a bit like a lightning conductor, and it conducts. You conduct the lightning down, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I hope that the person I'm thinking about gets to the same end as the person in this book. Let's see. Anyway.
Yes. One right at the back, and then one in the middle, and then one right at the back.
Okay.
We've been hearing a lot about Picasso recently, not the painter, but the man. And two questions. One is it a good time to buy?
Yeah.
If I had the money.
To buy Picasso.
But more importantly, because the prices might come down. More importantly, what's your take on it? I mean, do we not like Picasso anymore? Do we watch him with a certain context? Do we have a filter that we put on? How do you look at it as an art historian?
Okay, so the first part of your question, I'm definitely the wrong person to ask because I'm not. I just don't. I'd love to buy Picasso. By the way, I think he's one of the world's most extraordinary I mean, he is obviously one of the world's most extraordinary artists, not because it's not what I think, everyone thinks so. And some of those Picassos are, I mean, they're just heaven. Are you thinking of buying one? No. In your dreams, yeah. So in my dream, in your, will his prices, will art, I mean, what I'm hearing is that the art market prices are coming down because the Russians, as the other gentleman mentioned, are not here anymore. They're sanctioned. The Chinese market is not doing so well. So I'm hearing that that probably the heat will come off the art market. I'm hearing that, but please don't take my advice. Don't go and buy Picasso, dear audience, now, because you might get it wrong. And your second part of your question is absolutely fascinating. It is one of the most fascinating things that we're facing at the moment is, do you take an artist's or a writer's work as independent from the person? And how should we cancel people who behave badly or not? I mean, and what is that divide? And I mean, what do you think?
Well, how long is a piece of string? I could go on and on and on about it. I mean, I'm just going to now slightly dodge the question, because actually, funny enough, I was writing about this on the other day, after the death of Françoise Gillot, who is one of his muses, whose value is going up. So in 2022, she sold a pit painting for £990,000, I think, which was 7 times the estimate. And then you've got Dora Maar. So you've got all the women who are emerging from the shadow of Picasso. And you just think, well... And actually, Françoise said something wonderful. She said, I learnt from them, and I must have learnt well. And I kind of think that's a very dignified place to be. I mean, he was a ruffian and you know, obviously morally awful, but the amazing observation and the amazing skill. Like I remember seeing a pot of a goat. Yeah. And you just say there's essence of goat in this pot. No, and you can't dismiss somebody with that, an artist with that sensibility.
Yeah, I don't think you can cancel great artists or writers. I think I personally think that's probably, I mean, unpleasant as it might be, you know, their life isn't their work. I mean, a really great artist or writer, I think, makes something more of their work than just their life. I mean, certainly it feeds into it. I read a book called The Way We Live Now. I reread a book called The Way We Live Now by Trollope the other day. And the first time, I don't know if any of you have read it, it's a fabulous book, but the first time I read it thinking, whatever. And this time I read it, and it's incredibly abusive and anti-Semitic. Trollope was quite anti-Semitic. And I was thinking, gracious, this is extraordinary. But actually, at the time, I'm not in any way, as you might imagine, saying that anti-Semitism is a good thing. But at the time, I think it was more, wasn't it was acceptable, but there was a kind of vernacular that was used. But can I ask you, what would you do? Do you think we should separate lives from work?
It's the same question with museums and, galleries that have
Yeah.
objects. And I work quite closely with Mark's house.
Okay.
And yes, I would think about that. And I think you cannot cancel the past because it's happened already. But at the same time, one would re-examine it and say there is a filter through which you need to see.
Yeah. So yeah, it's so basically.
Acknowledge that there were wrongs that were done.
Yeah.
Or these are the things, and watch it with those eyes. I think we need a filter to say we cannot ignore it, but we cannot change it.
Yeah.
So let's put on a pair of glasses to see it for what it is.
And reframe it. I mean, I think that's a key thing. So, for example, there was a lovely little exhibition of Lee Miller photography down in the little market town in Hampshire last autumn, and it was a lot about Lee Miller and Picasso. She was another Picasso person, but the way that it reframed him as somebody who was that she was his equal within this society was really interesting, and you just thought. So, I'm all for telling the story, but keeping the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should we just move very quickly? We're nearly out of time. There's somebody right at the back. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you both so much. I do have 2, if I may, please. Firstly, what are your thoughts on non-fungible tokens? And secondly, do you have any amusing recollections from your travels in India that you'd be willing to share?
My travels, I have to say, to be really honest, my travels in India was such a long, the one I was referring to was in my gap year, so I'm ashamed to tell you how long ago that was, but it was really, really, really a long time ago. So I'm not going to regale you with that, but in public anyway. But I can assure you it was one of the most formative experiences of my life. And I keep having fantasies about maybe I should go and do it again, actually. Maybe now in my ripe old age, you backpack off, do you reckon? Maybe not quite a backpack. Maybe a wheelie. Yeah. Thank you, Sandra. You can give me some advice. So NFTs, I think it's fascinating. I think it's a fascinating market. You know, it's so non-fungible tokens obviously being artwork that you can, which you don't. I sat next door to somebody the other day at an event, and he's a very, very successful person who works in tech. And I said to him, do you really want something, an NFT, which can be copied or whatever? And he said, yes, I really do, because actually I can take my artwork. He said, I travel all the time. I can take it on my phone. I can take it to any conference, to any hotel, anything I'm doing all over the world. And there it is, and I know nobody can copy it, and I know it's mine, and I can look at it. If I'd bought a painting at home, he said, I might only see it for 3 months a year.
Probably not at all, because it would have to be in storage, wouldn't it?
Exactly, it would have to be in storage and it has to be insured. He said, this is liberating. So actually, I was very interested by that. So I think there is, I think basically it's whatever rocks your boat. It's a bit like our discussion earlier about authenticity. You know, if NFTs are the things that you find really interesting and they're a very practical application, i.e. you can have it anywhere and you can't steal it, you don't have to insure it, great. Personally, I'm still quite old-fashioned. I Luddite. I quite like looking at something on a wall. That's my particular thing. But it's a good question.
So Damien Hirst sold NFTs and originals, didn't he?
Yeah.
And then got rid of the originals.
Damien Hirst is a brilliant businessman. Just brilliant. I think it's going to.
So is that philosophical or business? Philosophy or business? It's a bit of both.
Yeah, I'm sure if he were here, he would be a lot more eloquent than I am about why he did that. But I think, funny enough, I think Picasso would definitely have done NFTs, 100%. And David Hockney, David Hockney uses an iPad. I mean, Picasso, as we know, changed his style with every passing trend, and he was so bored and quixotic and interesting that I'm absolutely sure Picasso would have done something fabulous with an NFT. So why shouldn't Damien Hirst, I guess? By the way, I think Titian would have loved films. I think Titian, when you look at Titian's work, it's like a movie.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess they're there for our moment, aren't they?
Yeah.
Whether they're here the next moment, I'm not sure. I don't know.
So we're going to have to stop there, but I want to ask one more question, which is there going to be a third? There is. It's going to be a trilogy.
That entirely depends on all of you, because I will be able to write a third one if this one finds an audience.
Right.
So,
yes. So
anyway,
go and spread the word.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good.